I'm Keith Thompson, and I'm the author of a new book this year called The UFO Paradox. I've been a longtime observer of the UFO phenomenon. I don't come at it as a UFO witness trying to make sense of my own experience. That's a particular subgenre of the UFO field, people who've had a life-changing encounter. But as I studied the reports of people who have had these close encounters with these apparent beings and the apparent craft, and sometimes even end up inside these apparent craft, I was struck by the difficulty people have in coming to terms with these experiences. And I therefore had a really important moment of self-inquiry, if you will, in which I said, well, I've had that kind of experience, but it didn't involve UFOs. It involved, as you say, a near-death experience. And even though my book is not about the near-death phenomenon, I'm convinced that there is an overlap between the two. So I decided to write about my own experience. So let me tell you a little bit about what it was. So with that said, I was in Hawaii with a group of friends. We decided to go body surfing one day on the northern coast of Oahu, north of Honolulu, and came to a beach called Sunset Beach, which is famous for its very big waves and the signs with warnings like, if in doubt, don't go out. And of course, I was in my 20s. I was bold and brave and fearless. So we went into the water, played in the body surf, enjoyed. I went out a little farther than everybody else. I got taken by riptides and large waves. I got in trouble very fast. And because of what a riptide is, of course, is a tide rip current that pulls you away from the beach, away from shore, underneath the big waves coming in. Long story short, I got taken out and I was being pummeled by big waves and pulled further out by riptides. I was not a champion swimmer. I was getting exhausted very quickly. And I had a recognition. I said, I'm close to die. And then I was pulled down to the bottom of the water, if you will, way below the surface. Then I rose up and I thought I was rising up in with the water. What I was rising up above was the surface of the water. I was having what I now know was an out-of-body experience. I left my body through the back of my head. That was my experience. Saw my body, saw the person that I had thought myself to be up until that time of my life, mid-20s. And I said, well, I didn't quite say it this way, but I said, well, wait a minute. That's supposed to be me, but it's an object. I can see that. So the seeing of that is not the same as that. And I had this panoramic 360-degree sense of awareness and the most overwhelming sense of peace and tranquility that I can imagine. I not only saw my body struggling, this body called Keith, struggling in the water. I saw my friends on the shore calling for me, Keith, survive. My body was about 150 yards out from the shore, from the people who were calling my name. What I heard was one of my friends on the trip with us, who'd been in the water herself but got out. Her name was Mary, and she was saying to another friend of ours named Moore, why didn't Keith listen? Why didn't he stay out? I told him it was too dangerous. I told him the water was too rough. She was saying that in the same tone of voice I'm speaking to you now. So there's no way I would have heard that from 150 yards out in the ocean with waves pummeling me. It's just, I didn't hear it from there. So my sense of I went to Mary and I said, I'm okay. I'm not going to be coming back, but I'm okay. Life is okay. This is about something much bigger. Well, she didn't hear me. I could hear her say, why didn't he listen? She couldn't hear me. That reinforced my sense that I'm no longer alive or I'm dying. I am entering the realm of death. But I went through a tunnel, which I did not know existed. I did not know about the tunnel because the near-death experience was not yet on the map. I had never heard of it. I went through a tunnel. I heard sounds, brilliant light, like a psychedelic experience, if you will. It was just overwhelming sound and light, and also a sense of peace. The sense of going through a tunnel was something I was aware of, a sense of going through a kind of long, dark tunnel with the walls of the tunnel almost seeming to be animated. It was somewhere between organic and inorganic, and voices and music that increasingly sounded like choral music. I don't think ordinary life is a fraud or something that's not real. But what I saw, what I felt was that this encounter with an other world, the larger world, was unbelievably real. It was more real than real. I moved through this tunnel and opened into a field of light, a sense of pastures, a sense of flowers, a sense of angelic sounds. I saw relatives in what seemed to be spirit bodies, transparent but identifiable. I saw friends that I knew who had died. I did see also an uncle that I did not know had died. And when I came back and learned from early experience that telling this experience is not a good idea at casual parties. This is not easy chit chat. It's a way to get people to think that this guy's either nuts or he's got real needs for attention. He needs to be a spiritual person. Well, trust me, I don't have any needs to be a spiritual person because I'm no more spiritual than anybody else. I've had experiences that not everybody else has had about that I would call. I think the near-death experience is a profound spiritual experience. I remember thinking to myself two things. I said, first of all, I said, wow, dead isn't dead. I'm dead, but life is continuing. Consciousness, I'm continuing. So that was stunning in and of itself. And then I thought, with the overwhelming sounds and visions and lights, I said, this may kill me, but it can't hurt me. This may destroy me, but I'm untouchable because I am something that is never born. I had these very profound insights that I now recognize, having survived and studied, that these are sort of spiritual, core philosophical insights. I went to a place that was unbelievably beautiful. When I say a place, a scenario that I would say would be consistent with heaven. I would also add, I did not have a religious upbringing. We were not atheists. We were not even agnostic. We went to church only because, as my mother never quite said it this way, but I think her attitude was, it's good for good people to be seen at church. It's an idea socially. Good people get seen at church. We didn't have any deep beliefs about the afterlife or even this life or Jesus or any of it. So there was a sense also of a wisdom figure or a wisdom presence. It was like a source of wisdom, and it was downloading information, downloading insight. Now, can I tell you exactly what it all was? No, it's a little bit like if one has ever experienced psychedelics in a setting that is therapeutic and reflective rather than, let's take LSD and go to the mall. That's not a good idea, I would say. Instead, if you're going to do psychedelics, you should have a guide. You should know what dose. You should have a mindset that is open to feeling safe and so forth. But it's a little bit like when you have a dose of psychedelics, you have very big insights about the nature of things that don't always come back with you when you get poured back into the body. That was very much like what happened here. I had a sense of what is the source. I had a sense of God as the original and continuous creativity that is always present. I came up with that phrase. Original God, if you will, is a term for original and continuous creation. That which causes this to continue to be, and that which causes this moment to seem infinite when it so often does. We often feel trapped in our circumstances, but then we realize we've been trapped before, and I survived. But in any case, I didn't have the classic declaration be made to me, it is not your time, you must go back. I didn't have that. But suddenly I found myself back in my body. I was somehow catapulted back into my body. I was in a fairly calm part of the water, a cove. In retrospect, it was surreal to have gone from struggling to survive to completely accepting death as I experienced it, now back in the body that had been trying to survive and realizing, oh, I'm Keith again, that I was just no longer Keith, or I was formerly Keith. And interestingly, there were two dolphins by my side, if you will, accompanying me to my friends who now were wading out into the water, pulling me up, helping me, stand up and steady myself. And as I walked to the shore and they got me dried off and tended to my scrapes and bumps and so no major injuries, one of my friends said, wow, man, we thought you'd given it up out there. I thought for a moment, oh, good, I can have this conversation. I said, I died, but I came back. Well, they too had never heard of the near-death experience. They didn't know there was such a thing. People don't survive death. They don't die and come back, or they don't skirt death and come back. And if I told them about the tunnel, that would have added to my sense of being a delusional person. That's what I got. I was actually quite lucid, maybe because I'd been through such a harrowing trauma. I was attentive to every second. I was more clear. It was hyper real. The colors more colorful, the shapes and shades more bright and brilliant. And so as part of my lucidity, I was able to see that the more I insisted that I had died and come back, the more I would be seen as a candidate for deep therapy. In fact, that night they said, you had a trauma and you have a lot of ideas about what happened, but you'll work through that and you'll be a normal person again. I knew actually that what I'd been through was profoundly real. And only within a matter of weeks, I think, when I began to share it with a few people that I thought wouldn't either ridicule or dismiss or marginalize, they said, you've had a near-death experience. Well, I said, well, I guess so, but what do you mean? They said, the near-death experience. You've never heard of? No, I hadn't seen the Oprah interviews with Raymond Moody. I hadn't seen the talk shows with survivors of near death, and I had not studied the phenomenon. So here's the interesting thing I'll add. All of that can be seen, the sense of being in heaven and seeing relatives. I'm fully aware that the debunkers, the materialist philosophers and scientists who generally talk about this subject say, oh, that's just an end of life brain program that kicks in so that people who are dying can feel comforted. I'm not looking to believe anything. I'm willing to have my experience of any kind explained in prosaic terms if it's possible to do so. I'm an empirical guy. I like facts. I don't like beliefs. I choose facts over beliefs to the degree that they're different. But there was one aspect of this that was not reducible to any kind of ordinary experience. And that was the next day after my near-death experience, I said to my friend Mary, who I'd heard on the beach, I said, Mary, could we go for a walk? She said, sure. She was actually happy to, be with me. And she knew that I was probably in need of talking. And I said, I heard what you said yesterday on shore. And she looked confused. She said, what do you mean? And I quoted her. I said, why didn't he listen? I told him it wasn't safe to go out there. The water was too rough. Why didn't he listen? All I can say is I saw my friend's face. I saw the blood draining from the top of her head to her neck. She was astonished. We were both in our 20s. We were not students of philosophy or religion. We didn't have any views about when consciousness begins, where it ends, what is consciousness? I now have more thoughts about that because of my experience. I've investigated these things. But we both knew that it should not have been possible for me to have heard her. I had heard her from out of my body. I'd had a non-local experience, which, as you know, is very common. The near-death experience got put on the map when people would come back from surgery and tell their doctors. I heard the doctor would say, I'll tell you your prognosis since you survived. And the patient would say, I already know the prognosis, doctor. I overheard you talking with Dr. Smith in the building across the street this morning. You were eating a tuna salad sandwich, and that's why you've got that spot on your tie. The doctor would have to pull his jaw back up from the floor. What are you talking about? Did you get up out of bed and follow me? And the most interested doctors and most interested researchers of the near-death phenomenon turn out to be the very doctors who did not believe any such thing was possible, but were told by their patients that this is what they had experienced. I had not thought about life and death per se in any existential sense. I had not found the existential. I'd done some reading in college, existential philosophers, but I hadn't personalized it. But I came back without a fear of death. My fear of death disappeared. And I came to realize that when friends after that experience would die, family or friends, and I said, okay, they've made that passage. And I don't know where they are. I was always the one in the family who had a natural kind of knack for being with those who lost someone. And in fact, when my mother died in hospice about 18 years ago, turned out I was the one of the four boys, who had a natural ability to be with my mom. I literally was cradling her body in the hospice in the last moment she took her life. And I was talking to her, even though she was in a coma. As you know, the hearing tends to go on. So what you say is what you want them to hear. And you want to be very careful. And I would say to her, Mom, guess what? We're all okay. All four of us are fine. This is your time to go, to be free, to go on this great journey. And I began to tell her about what I'd experienced in Hawaii. I had never told her about my experience. Again, I'm telling her while she was out. I don't know what impact it had. I will say this too, that as I was laying by her side in the hospice, I felt in the room a growing sense of presence. I heard and felt vaporous presence, and I heard murmurings, and I thought to myself, these are dead coming to get mom. And I did not know about deathbed experiences. I didn't even know about the tradition that happened. I've talked to people who've had near-death experiences, and they have often said, because they often came back in pain, they had an automobile accident, they came back with disabilities, life was difficult. They've often felt that if only I could get out of here now. I want to go back to that realm. And that has always sort of been intuitively mistaken, in my view. For whatever reason, we're here with a sense of purpose. I had a sense through this that life is inherently filled with value and purpose. The human experiment is a sense of being a body with all the limitations of that. So I'm, on the one hand, an advocate of do everything that you want to do in this lifetime. My main counsel to people is pretty much that of a life coach. Identify what you want to do and go for it, and find out what keeps you from loving and doing what you want. And at the same time, there's nothing to fear about what's beyond. And as a matter of fact, I have an intuition that the Tibetan Buddhists are correct. You know, they have an understanding what they call the bardos, the stages of dying, and they prepare through meditation practices to be ready for the moment of death so that they're not confused by the overwhelming lights and sound and motions and commotion, which I experienced going through the tunnel. So I'm thinking they're onto something. But I think it's even deeper than preparing for the moment of death. I think that the more we develop ourselves, our capacities, our emotional intelligence, our capacity to be helpful to other people, our capacity to give our bodies what they need to thrive in this material world, we probably carry that with us, that consciousness continues. I can't prove that, but I have no doubt about it. So life continues in some form. And I think that reincarnation, there's some evidence for reincarnation, but I don't think necessarily reincarnation is a universal, or it might be a stage beyond. I mean, I saw people in a place like heaven who looked like they were going to stay there. So is that a permanent abode, or is that a temporary? Is that a transitional abode? I don't begin to know. But beyond this realm, I think intentionality, intention and belief are probably very important. And I think dying with a sense that there's nothing that can hurt me about the end of my life. The end of life may be painful. You may be in physical pain because of nerve endings registering the pain, but that's often confused with I don't want to die. I think people mean they don't want to, well, often people mean they don't know what's after this. It might just be nothing. Well, if that's the case, how is nothing going to hurt you? How is nothing hurting you right now? But I don't think it probably is nothing. But I don't know necessarily that the identity of Keith would be transferred entirely. I don't know. But I would say live this life fully and be willing to let it go when it comes.